Hello, in this video I'll show you how to make gluten-free banana bread. First, I mash 2 overly ripe bananas. It's best to use overly ripe bananas for banana bread because the starch in the banana has converted to sugar, which will make the bread much sweeter. Additionally, they're easier to mash and will be smoother in the batter. You can see the banana skins that I'm using are mostly brown or black bananas with a little bit of yellow. Next, I cream 1 stick of softened butter and then add in a half cup of granulated sugar and a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. I forgot to add the brown sugar here, so I added it in later, but I still creamed it in with the butter. I use softened butter rather than melted butter for this recipe because gluten-free breads tend to be much more dense, and melted butter tends to make recipes chewier. By using soft butter and creaming it with the sugar, we're aerating it and putting a lot of air and lift into the butter, which will help improve the texture of the bread. I add some brown sugar into this recipe rather than just sticking with the granulated sugar for 2 different reasons. The first is because gluten-free flour tends to absorb more moisture, and brown sugar has extra moisture in it compared to granulated sugar because of the molasses that's in it. This helps maintain a moist bread. Additionally, the brown sugar will give the bread a caramely flavor that will go really well with the bananas and the pecans and chocolate. I cream these together for about 2 minutes until the butter and sugar is smooth. Then I add 2 eggs to the mix, but I only add these eggs one at a time, and I make sure that the first egg is creamed into the butter and sugar well before adding the second egg. It's important that this egg is at room temperature, otherwise it can re-harden the butter. I cream the egg in with the butter and sugar for about 1 minute. The benefit of creaming the egg in at this point is that the egg acts as an emulsifier, which is essentially a stabilizer. It stabilizes the air that's been whipped into the butter, and it also keeps the butter and the sugar together so they won't separate during the baking. It's at this point that I realized I hadn't added in the brown sugar yet, so I added it in here now. Now that the butter, sugars, and eggs are appropriately combined, I add in the mashed bananas. I mix these in with a spatula while trying not to knock out any of the air from the butter. You'll notice that the water that's in the banana starts to separate away from the oil that's in the butter. That's okay because everything will combine together when we add in the flour. I wiped down the bowl that the bananas had been in, and now I'm adding in 1½ cups of flour. This is Bob's Red Mill 1:1 gluten-free baking flour. This flour has xanthan gum in it, but if your blend doesn't, then you'll need to add 1 1/4 teaspoon of xanthan gum to this mix. The xanthan gum is essential as a stabilizer and taking the place of what gluten would do in a normal bread recipe. I'm using the spoon and level method to measure out 1½ cups of flour. Gluten-free flours tend to be more dense and can pack into your measuring devices, so this is a great way to make sure that you're getting a consistent flour measurement each time that you make the recipe. Then I add in a ½ teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and ½ teaspoon of cinnamon. I whisk the dry ingredients together before adding them to the wet ingredients. Then I add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients. Adding dry to wet helps prevent clumping. I mix this together with my mixer just until the flour is incorporated. You could also do this step by hand. Finally, I add 1 cup of chopped pecans and ½ cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. I fold these in with the spatula. I grease a 9x6 loaf pan and then place this in the oven to bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 50 minutes. The internal temperature should read 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you'll know that the bread is fully cooked. Once the bread is done baking, take it out of the baking dish and place it on a cutting board to slice. Use a bread knife and make sure that the bread is cool enough to touch before doing this. Thanks for watching this video on how to make gluten-free banana bread. Let me know how it worked out for you in the comments below, and as always, like and subscribe to see more content.